board members of museums or donors to museums or whatever who gave money to back certain kinds of art were giving that money and were buying the collections they were buying out of a sense of personal conviction. The corporate patron, the government patron, even today the museum patron in many cases, is not sponsoring art, is not funding art, is not exhibiting art out of any personal conviction. There is a kind of consensus, a kind of impersonal decision-making process. What will reflect best on us for us to sponsor? There's a totally impersonal element, and that's true whether it's the National Endowment for the Arts in Washington or whether it's Philip Morris, Xerox, or whether it's the MacArthur Foundation. There's it's a kind of part of it is a kind of Chinese restaurant menu philanthropy. One from row A, one from row B. We have a black realist on our list, so we need a white feminist. We have somebody who does Hispanic art. So we then will need something maybe from Eastern Europe. There's in that sense, it's politicized. These are in some sense sort of affirmative action decisions about what we're going to sponsor. There's no person there experiencing the art that's being funded and promoted. There's a total, there's a severing of any kind of what I would call sort of human connection between the source of the patronage and the objects that are on the receiving end of the patronage. That to me has been a devastating change because it puts the whole enterprise of patronage into the realm, into the hands of the bureaucrats. And we now have, of course, more and more bureaucrats acting as middlemen between the artist and whatever institutions exhibit the art, as a general thing. I remember some years ago when I was still at the Times, having a conversation with a man who was starting what he felt was going to be a very major biennial exhibition of contemporary American painting in the South. And he said this would be the most important thing of its kind in the world, and he began going through all the benefits the artist would receive from being selected for this exhibition. And I said, because by that time this was virtually always my first question about such enterprises, I said, how much of the money is going for administration? Well, he turned to his assistant, well, we've got those figures here somewhere, and he went on and on about what a great thing it was going to be, and I kept coming back to this question of how much of the budget was going for administration. In other words, for bureaucracy. Well, finally, he said, when he saw that I wasn't going to drop the subject, well, we're trying to keep it down to 60%. Well, and if you have any experience with museums, you know that for every real curator a museum adds to its staff, there are a great many non-curatorial persons being added to that staff. Probably the single biggest area of growth in the museum world has been in the so-called public information department, the publicity department. They're also the best run departments in most museums because their tasks are relatively simple. They don't have to deal with objects, they don't have to deal with artists, except maybe sometimes they get them to keep their mouths shut. You know, they keep the trains running on time, and that's the biggest area of expansion. Well, when you have that kind of growth in the museum, you no longer really have anything even remotely resembling what a patron was once understood to be, that is, someone who put his money where his taste was. All that's gone, or at least gone underground. Yes. Well, the great attendance to the museums, I think, are accountable for, by a number of factors. One is that art has, a consciousness of art has, certainly within my lifetime, my adult lifetime, moved from the sort of margin of cultural life to into the mainstream. Part of that, I think, had to do with the attention that art in this country began to receive in the late 50s, when the international success of the New York School brought into American life a consciousness that this country, and in particular New York, enjoyed a kind of central position on the international art scene it had never had before. I think without there being an American art that served as a kind of anchor to public consciousness, however ignorant the public might have been about the art itself, it would have been sort of more difficult for that momentum to have followed the course that it did. But at the same time, the museums began to acquire a kind of glamour that actually not that many other cultural institutions in our society have. There's almost no other cultural institution that can welcome so many people at one time, that is so relatively cheap. They used to be free, of course, when all this started. But we're a prosperous country and people can afford to pay what they pay, and it's certainly cheaper now even than going to the movies, not to mention the opera or a theater or a ballet. And then, of course, there is this tremendous publicity machine banging away at all times. On the television screen, on the newspapers, magazines, school tours are organized. They bring people out of hospitals in wheelchairs. I mean, I'm not mocking that, but I mean, it's organized like a war effort. And when you go to the museums, and I'm not talking about the Degas show or these blockbusters, but if you go to you go to Metropolitan, I mean, if you sort of look for places where the crowd, hasn't found it yet. You can usually find it in the Islamic art galleries, because I think there is there is sort of less, except for people who fancy Oriental carpets, there is less sort of instant gratification to the ignorant eye in the Islamic art galleries than there is in a lot of other parts of the metropolitan. Yes.
I mean this to be a personal question rather than a philosophical one. Personally, what do you view as the function of an art critic?
The function of an art critic, I think, was best defined many years ago by T.S. Eliot when, in talking about literary criticism, he said the following: criticism has two functions, the elucidation of works of art and the correction of taste. And both of those, or each of those, one could expand upon it, because the task of elucidating a work of art differs a great deal from object to object. I mean, some art objects can only be, or can be elucidated in historical terms, others in purely visual terms, formal terms. The correction of taste is always one of the largest tasks of criticism, because taste, by and large, is always that is the general taste is always lacking in a certain kind of alertness. It tends to be uninformed or informed about the wrong things. It tends to be pious, to be unquestioning about itself. And that's certainly one of the tasks of criticism, to put established taste into question and to present alternatives to it. Eliot, I think, had a fairly high respect for the concept of taste, and I share it. The notion that the word taste signifies something superficial, I think, is a great mistake. Taste is really a profound element in our lives. We base many of our judgments of the people we meet on the basis of taste, and as we do our judgments of art. Almost all of our waking hours are in some way or another challenges to our taste. And that certainly, I think, is one of the central tasks of criticism. Yes?
Going back to the central, sort of the battleground of new art right now, you were talking about the Philistinism of the avant-gardism. Because almost all the tactics of artists have been usurped by the avant-gardism, now makes it very difficult for artists to in a way, they have no mechanism to attack the avant-garde, because any way they attack the avant-garde is already used to attack itself and to attack them. So you were talking about this sense of the reactionariness of say, a non-avant-garde artist who does new work. Given that relationship, where, I don't know exactly how to ask this question, because It's out there on the frontier of art. If there's going to be new art, in a way it can't be new because the avant-garde has always stood for new, so we've got ourselves in a double bind.
Well, I thought that was the nature of the problem I was outlining. However, new is a very treacherous word. You could say that for anyone who really understood what Duchamp, Miro, Schwitters, and Joseph Cornell had done in their work, there was nothing new in Rauschenberg. What was new in Rauschenberg was that it was bigger. But that was sufficient. In such a volatile art scene, a shift of scale, a kind of recycling of cliches through a shift of scale, can often lead to an instant reputation.
So I'm not talking about reputation, I'm talking about is actually the art itself. I mean, if we're talking about the significance of art and the use of art as some kind of a cultural, meaningful communication system, now we have a situation where the corporations are terrified of content. The museum...
Oh no, the corporations are not terrified of content. They love it. Well, but it's hard to, I don't know, gosh, I mean, I went to see the other day down at the World Financial Center, which houses the world headquarters of Dow Jones, American Express. I mean, you can't get more corporate than that. And there's all this, anti-bourgeois art in the lobby. Lots of electronics, lots of dirt. They have some chickens crapping in a cage. Those corporations aren't afraid of content. They're much more comfortable with it than they are with art, and they're using all that stuff at the World Financial Center as a kind of hustle to win even more upscale tenants for their skyscraper. It's a great mistake to think that those corporations don't like content. They love it. However, I don't mean to dismiss your question. I'll only say about it is that if I really had the answer to your question, I would be an artist and not a critic. Because the answer to that question will only come from artists. Yes.
Do you feel as though taste is something that is static? The taste has been the same since Greek times or before times, or does taste change from generation to generation and era to era?
Well, taste, I think, always changes, but it doesn't necessarily get better.
You're not trying to qualify it as being better or worse, but it certainly does change.
Well, of course, taste is...
The thing that happens with art, it changes. When the impressionists and post-impressionists, which are now all in review, were first exposed, as you probably know, the audience didn't spit at them. And that's something that we all are aware of. And it took a long time before they were properly, duly appreciated. And it's the same with the American abstract movement. When they first came out in the 30s, they were trash. No one would even look at them. It took until the 50s before there was an appreciation of what they meant, and there's a greater appreciation as shown by a price quotient today than there even was in the late 60s. And so it came about that when something that was different than what the abstract expressionists were doing was started in the 60s, all of a sudden the abstract expressionists practically were all ready to commit suicide because there was no one interested in even talking to them. And it works that, it's been working that way from ever, that when any new movement comes in, it takes 50, 60 years before it becomes a classic. And we are never able to tell for certain whether that's going to be considered junk like the bourgeois are today, or it's going to be considered accepted fine art. So I don't know, that's a heck of a position that you critics are always in, because you have to make a statement that you may live long enough to wish you hadn't made.
Well, yes, but that's true of artists too. I think that, well, it's critics are so quickly forgotten that I don't think that any of them need to live in mortal fear.
I don't think that would be your thing.
Well, thank you, but I'm not sure I agree with that. But I think that basically what you say is true, that posterity is finally the only critic that counts in the long run. But of course in the long run we're all dead, and we would like to at least have some sense of where we are now while we're still here. I think the difference between now and then is that now I think we can no longer feel certain that because an artist is denounced as trash, that he isn't trash. That is, we're not going to produce a greater number of great artists in our time than other periods have produced in theirs. It's one of those paradoxical situations.
It's very simple to explain, though. That's because there were 2 art schools or 3 art schools per country. Here in America now, we have hundreds of art schools, and every university as well has an art school. So we're turning out artists by the drove.
Yes, alas. And I have to look at them all. Yes. Well, I don't really think it's the task of criticism to predict the future. That is, I think the real task of criticism is to pay attention to what artists do. And where art is going to go is up to artists, and it's not up to critics. And I don't believe in, I mean, there are critics who I know are very much given to what I call legislating the future. But I don't really believe, I don't know, maybe they're more far-seeing into the future than I am, but I feel that my hands are full just trying to cope with the present.
Yes. I have a question that relates sort of the nature of criticism, and it's from the New Criterion, September 88, and Judge Pearl's review of the far-reaching one. With only a couple of sentences or so, he comes up with a statement that he's light years away from John Singer. He's talking about Eric Fisher. Sargent's talents in this line, and Sargent can be admired only for many minds. Fisher was always a lousy artist, now he's a smugly lousy artist. Do you have any comment on it?
Oh, I think it's an understatement. I saw that exhibition. I dealt with it much more harshly in my review.
You actually reviewed it, and here there was only a sentence that is that really what criticism is about?
Well, there's more than a sentence about Fischl in that.
Not anymore.
Yeah, well, I think that, the tasks of criticism are different according to different publications. When you're writing in a daily paper, you are bringing sort of the first news of an odd event very often, and so you have to handle it with a kind of detail and description that is already not quite as necessary when you're writing for a weekly, and is much, much less necessary when you're writing for a monthly, where you can assume, at least we can assume among readers of the New Criterion, that they will already be, alert to the event. They will probably have read something about it in the past, usually something wrong, or certainly not as intelligent as what we publish. And so that it's, I think, perfectly permissible to write that kind of somewhat abridged review. The reason I suggest that you're disturbed or surprised by that is probably, I'm guessing, are probably not necessarily your judgment about Fischl's standing as an artist, but about the scale of his reputation and the market that he enjoys. But of course, criticism should not allow the reputation or market to determine everything in criticism. Already, perforce, it determines a great deal because the market has a way of focusing attention, if only because artists who are out of the market tend to exhibit more frequently than artists who aren't. But I don't simply think there's anything wrong with writing about a failed artist in that manner. No, I don't think that's the case. I think that by and large, our artists are as good as, our best artists are as good as or better than others. I think what has changed is that the art that is exhibited in the galleries and in the museums today, that is new art or recent art, tends to be rather more internationalist in scope than, say, it was tends to be in the 60s and the early 70s. Now, some of that has to do with the fact that artists have emerged who were thought to be doing new things, extraordinary things, painters, teachers, lots of painters from Germany, some from Italy. So the Italian craze seems to have pretty much expired. And probably more and more lasting contributions from Britain than from places on the continent. France has still totally disappeared as a country in which one would think of going to look at new art, as far as I can tell. No, I don't. I'm not a believer in the idea that America's hour, either as a nation or as a culture, has passed. It certainly doesn't look that way from Europe, because all the young European artists I've ever met all want to be here. That is, they often get nice stipends from their home countries, and they can count on, if they achieve some kind of visibility or celebrity in America, they can usually be counted on being welcomed home by their art institutions as conquering heroes. But I don't see any loss of America's place in the international art scene. I don't see any evidence of it at all. Yes.
I'm going to ask a question that I was never asked of anyone, and I asked it of you just as the founder of the Museum of Contemporary Art, actually founded because almost 25 years ago, out of the bar, suggested that there was no such thing as existence as contemporary. Anyhow, I did it. And we have always felt that it was our function to attempt to claim our knowledge with whatever we thought was best in contemporary art. Now, in listening to you, I have the feeling that you don't think there is anything that's worthwhile for us to show. It puts us in rather a bit of a dilemma. If you were, for example, to want to change your job someday and become the director and operator of this museum, how would you start to organize exhibitions?
Well, it would be uphill work. I know, and I'm giving you a very serious answer. I think that the people who have the responsibility to organize such exhibitions on a fixed schedule have created a problem for themselves that is insoluble. That is an institution that lays down a calendar requiring that they're going to be 12 exhibitions, 8 exhibitions, each of which embraces X number of artists in the course of the calendar year. And brings to that calendar the expectation that there is enough new work worth exhibiting, and that's going to be worth exhibiting right on demand, I think has created a problem that's insoluble. And this is not a problem I'm unacquainted with. Over all those years I was with the New York Times, particularly in the latter years, I would frequently be asked to attend meetings with editors, and the first question always was, what's new? And ideally, from the New York Times point of view, they would like to have had something new and terrific 52 weeks of the year. Now we know that that's not the way human culture works. And on one occasion I made the error of saying, well, there was nothing new, meaning that week. And my editor said, is that a trend? And so there's no way out of that dilemma. There's no way out. I mean, if you get on the express train, then that's the direction you have to go in. Maybe museums shouldn't be look like express trains. Maybe we should rethink what the best function of a museum is. Maybe there's a kind of Heisenberg's principle involved here, that if we didn't look so desperately for the thing, maybe the thing wouldn't be there, or it would be somewhere else. I don't really have a satisfactory answer to that question, because I think the expectation, the institutional and emotional and intellectual expectation that there's always going to be enough that's new, that's worthwhile, is no longer an expectation that we can really count on delivering for us. Yes.
No more questions?
Yeah. I don't know of a single bush that the floodlights are not examining at full force. There are curators, critics, collectors, they're all dealers, they're all out there flooding the landscape. I don't think that there are a lot of things undiscovered. Thank you very much.